Alright, so in this video, we're actually going to take a peek at another handheld system, the BittBoy new Pocket Go version 2 console. I've had this sitting in my desk for a few months now and I've been meaning to do a review, so I figured may as well get it out of the way. This is Steve from Restalgia, and let's get started. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Pocket Go version 2, but before that I do want to mention this was not sent to me by review. I personally purchased it, had it shipped out, and I just hadn't had a chance to do a full review on it. That being said, they did send me the original Pocket Go for review, and I gotta say this seems to be a substantially better unit. Let's go ahead and get this thing out of the box. Now as you guys can see, we obviously are going to have our main console right on in here. But then when we look towards the bottom of the box, we have a little bag with some extra stuff in it. The first thing that we're going to have is just a very brief instruction sheet that is just going to tell us what all the buttons are and how to navigate the menus. We're also going to be given a USB-C charging cable. And then the last thing that they provide is one of those micro SD to USB adapters that you would use if you wanted to transfer data onto the device or onto an SD card in general. Now switching over to the console itself, it is actually a substantial improvement from the previous Pocket Go version, and I am going to have one out here to compare side by side, but I do have to say this looks a lot nicer and it feels a lot more comfortable in your hands. Now the obvious additions here are that this does have a single analog stick, as well as both L12 and R12 buttons. Now in terms of putting it side by side to the original Pocket Go, you guys can see that this is a substantially larger build. It's about somewhere around 60 to 70% larger, and it is a lot more comfortable. And that being said, it is even more powerful. The internal software is a little bit different, but for the most part, the navigations, the settings, they're all kind of located in the same areas, and it's relatively simple to navigate, assuming you've used one of the Pocket Go's before. Now in terms of its specs, we are looking at the JZ4770 dual-core 64-bit processor that's clocked in at about 1 GHz. It's got 512 megabytes of DDR2 RAM. It's going to come preloaded up with a 32 gig micro SD card, which did come with games on it, which I wasn't expecting, especially considering this was just a regular purchase and it wasn't sent to me for a review, so it looks like they are shipping these things out with all those games loaded up. One of the big changes here is that it sports a 3.5 IPS tempered glass panel display with a resolution of 320 by 240, and it has a fairly beefy battery with a lithium-ion BM20 2000 mAh built-in battery. Now that being said, going into the information about the battery, you actually have access to remove the battery cover on the back, which was something that wasn't previously available on the older BittBoy, and now you can actually pull the battery out. So the BM20 battery is something that can be purchased online from a whole host of different places. So if you wanted to have some extra batteries, say you're on the road a lot, you could actually have a bunch of pre-charged batteries and take them with you and just swap them out as needed. Now it is important to note that this device is more or less the same thing as the RG350. All the internal specs are almost identical. In fact, I think they actually are identical. The only difference here is that the RG350 has dual analog support, whereas this only has single analog. But to be completely honest, even the main operating system that they're running, it's all identical. So you're essentially getting a slightly cheaper version of the RG350 when you purchase the BittBoy Pocket Go 2. Looking around the device, if we take a peek at the bottom, you're going to see that we have dual micro SD card slots. The micro SD card that's in the left slot is actually one that comes preloaded with all of the games, the applications, software, things like that. So that's something that you're going to have to leave in place. But the one on the right is one that you can add yourself. Now I threw in the maximum supported size of 128 gig micro SD card, and I'm going to be able to load this up with a ton of games. And one of the big features about the Pocket Go 2 is that it does support PlayStation games. And that is something I'm going to show you guys in just a little bit as well. Now, taking a look at our main menu, we have a ton of things going on here. We have an application section, we have a games section, we have settings and all of those sort of things. They even give us little tools like an input tracker to make sure that our buttons are mapped and working properly. So it is nice that they include it. That being said, I personally found that my D-pad when I pressed the up button wasn't as responsive as any of the other buttons. I'm assuming it's just something going on internally where I just have to disassemble it and reseat some of the buttons. But I do want to make note, but I didn't really have this issue with any of the other buttons. Another big thing that I want to talk about here is the speaker. I cannot believe how powerful and loud this thing is. I mean, just listen to how loud this thing gets. Now, that being said, one of the problems with the speaker is that it is really, really loud, but when you try to get down into the lower volume settings, you either get to a point where it's at a normal room level volume and then no volume at all. There really isn't any in between. So just be prepared that the volume settings may need to be adjusted individually inside of any of the games or the cores that are running on this console. Now, in terms of emulation, it actually is much better than the original Pocket Go in terms of what it's capable of doing. Now, on the main menu, you're going to see that you have access to a ton of different consoles. For example, we've got MAME, PlayStation 1, Nintendo, Game Boy Advance, Super Nintendo, Genesis. All those consoles are going to be available, and there's a few things on here like Emulation Station and N64, which I personally loaded on myself, but I'll talk about those in a little bit because there are a ton of issues with some of the additional ports that you can sideload. Jumping into NES emulation, it is fantastic. As you guys can see, the screen is beautiful, the games play properly, there isn't any input lag, and it just feels good. Even the arcade games that I've tested out, they all actually felt pretty good. Here's an example of one. This is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the 4-player version. Now, I didn't bother recording any test footage of Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, because they're all fairly basic consoles and they actually do run quite well. I wanted to jump into some Super Nintendo because a lot of these handheld devices can struggle when you're playing some of the FX-enabled games. But to my surprise, it actually did quite well. I was a little bit concerned about the performance that we were going to get because of the processor, but honestly, it's played every single Super Nintendo game that I threw at it perfectly fine. Next, we're going to take a peek at PlayStation, and this is going to be the big selling feature of this console. With the added analog stick, it is great that it's there because you can take advantage of it. That being said, I was actually surprised to notice that half the emulators aren't mapped properly, and you're still forced to use the D-pad rather than being able to jump between D-pad or analog depending on what type of game you're playing and things like that. So it is a little strange that they included the analog, yet it's only supported on a very small handful of the emulators. Jumping into Crash Bandicoot, we actually get some very good performance, and there definitely wasn't any frame rate drops with this game. I figured it would be important to also test some of the very difficult to emulate PS1 games, so we're going to go ahead and load up Tekken 3, and as you can see, it's not 100%, we aren't getting a solid 60 FPS in terms of gameplay, but we are getting pretty close, and it is averaging about 52, 53 FPS, which is absolutely playable. So what that shows to me is that this console is 100% going to be able to play up to 95% of PlayStation 1 games with almost no issues. But then that's where we're going to jump into some of the side-loaded emulators. Now, as I said, this is more or less the exact same console as the RG350, just reskinned by BittBoy. And because of that, there's actually a fairly decent community of people who have developed ports and applications that can be used on the console. Obviously, I mentioned Emulation Station, and then we've also got N64 running on this thing. But I will say N64 is absolutely a no-go. There is no chance that you're going to get any N64 game to run, even just trying to get Super Mario 64, which is arguably one of the easiest N64 games to emulate. You couldn't even sit through till you got to the point where you're actually able to control Mario. And then going back to Emulation Station, as soon as I saw that this was available as a port, I got really excited because I'm not really a huge fan of the main menu navigation, and Emulation Station is visually one of the best front ends you can get for any sort of handheld or even console-based system. That being said, I was able to get it to work for a couple of days, and then all of a sudden it just wouldn't launch anymore. And of course, these are all in beta, and I'm sure it has something to do with configuration files and that, but it was incredibly complicated to get this thing loaded up in the first place, and it's not something that I would recommend to many people. But generally speaking, the console is actually fairly good, and for a price point of $70, which is substantially cheaper than the RG350, I would actually make this a recommended product from me if you are looking for some sort of portable console that can play PlayStation games. Now, I'm going to leave links to purchase these things in the description down below. If you guys are interested in grabbing one, feel free to hop down there and just click on the link and order one yourself. The overall build quality is pretty good, and I am fairly happy with it. It does have one of the nicest displays that I've seen on any of the handheld consoles, so it does have that going for it. But that's pretty much all I've got for you guys in this video. Let me know in the comment section below if you guys picked one of these up and what you guys think of it. Be sure to hit that thumbs up button or the thumbs down button if you did not like the video. Thank you guys so very much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys again real soon.